everybody. Welcome to Top Soccer Coach. Today I have with me Ben Franks, and Ben Franks is from the UK. You're from England, right, Ben?
Yep.
Perfect. I had a chance to take Ben's course online. Ben offers a soccer coaching course through a company called Emergence, and it's ecological approach to coaching soccer. And I really love the course, and obviously I enjoyed all the information I was able to cover with Ben in the course. It was really enlightening for me. So some nice new ideas I was able to bring into my program. And Ben, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for inviting me on. It's awesome to be on such a big platform. So yeah, I mean, I teach at Oxford Brookes University. I teach on their sports science and their sport coaching programs. I'm currently coaching at it's a local club now because I work so far away from where I live.
Yeah.
I can't deal with
You're
coaching
still at the
everywhere anymore.
girls' club, Ben? At the women's
What's it?
club?
No, so I've moved on from the women's club. I am because I started working in this new university. It's nowhere near where I live, and then spending the weekends traveling all across the country with Gillingham women. It got too much. I was under pressure from my partner to put a cap on some stuff. So I just coach a more local team in the league I used to coach in. It's like a county regional league. So that's been interesting. It's been yes, I'm coaching there. It's really fun club, and we've got no budget, no expectations. One of the few teams in the league. In fact, I think we're the only team in the league without a budget. So it's been really nice just having to stick with players and work with players and kind of really get in there and coach because we haven't got the luxuries of bringing in big signings on big money to kind of make us better. So that's been a really enjoyable part of it.
All right. So you're saying you can't sign me, Ben? Is that what you're saying?
I couldn't afford you.
Listen, I thought of you the other day. My team, we're getting prepared for the playoffs, and they got to the field and they're used to doing their rondos or whatever. And I broke out the frisbee and say, guys, today we're playing frisbee for a warm up. And they all loved it. They thought it was fun. Ultimate frisbee. I was like, yeah, I got that from Ben Franks. There you go.
I've not brought the frisbee out yet. I've been a bit more Mr. Serious coach for the last few months.
Oh, that's rather disappointing, Ben. No, I'm just joking. Listen, so I wanted to bring a few. I mean, for people who aren't really familiar with you here in the U.S. and the coaches, I wanted to first. What I try to do, Ben, is try to simplify the message that I give everybody. So one of the things that I really liked when before I took your course, I was a big fan of the Perception Action podcast, and I heard you on that a few times before, along with some other guys who I really enjoyed. And I had been doing my own research on the cognitive processing model and stuff like that, but I realized how important that connection between the academics and the coach who's on the field really is. And that's why I thought you were a really interesting guy too, because you're a guy who was a player, you're a real coach, and you're an academic. Can you kind of like how do you feel like do you feel like there's a lot of room to grow to make that connection between the academic people and the coaches?
Yeah, I mean, you say player, but I was barely a player.
You were a player, man. You're a goalkeeper. You were a
I'll
player.
take that claim. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm fortunate that I've been able to exist in the academic and the coaching space simultaneously, and it's probably I've debated this quite a lot lately, but it's probably put a cap on how far I can go in either field. Because I have to kind of split time into my real coaching work and split time into my real academic work. So I can never fully commit to one or the other. So there's always going to be a cap on how far I can go.
Do you feel that one really do you feel that the work you do in the academic and the work you do on the field complement each other and lead to new ideas though and new ways of working?
Yeah, massively. I think a lot of my work a lot of my coaching now has been informed by the work I'm doing in universities. I'm just stumbling into new areas of knowledge and that stuff. And a lot of it might be, kind of semi-conscious that I'm doing it.
Right.
And the way that it's actually impacting my coaching might be more in terms of my view of the world and how my philosophy and how I attach myself to the world is changing and being shaped by all these new things I'm seeing, reading, researching.
Yeah.
But then also, the models, things like the ecological approach that, I really latched onto when I was an undergrad student, and that's massively shaped how I view practice design and how I view sports as kind of as a big complex system kind of perspective. So I think it has to go hand in hand. I don't think you can say academic stuff shapes coaching world. I think coaching world shapes the academic world as much as it does in that particular field. So I think it's got to work both ways, which is perhaps where it's fallen a bit flat at times. With it's not always met in the middle particularly well, and there's been some of those kind of difficult or contested discourses where it's kind of, well, you're
Do
not
you
real
think like some of the
coaching.
coaches are kind of like, this is the way I was brought up, this is the way I learned it, and then it's a little hard, like, what's this academic guy saying? Like that connection, that simplicity between, some of the research and actually applying it, because coaches don't like have a lot of time, right? And they want to know, what can I use today, tomorrow, that's going to come in, that's going to actually work.
Yeah, massively, massively. And I think that's one of the reasons I've always tried to keep my hand in coaching, is because if I'm gonna go into clubs and work with coaches and do some coach development and do the things like the course of emergence, I need some kind of actual money in the bank from kind of being on the grass, knowing how to coach, knowing how to interact. I mean, I'm lucky. I look very football in the UK anyway, so I don't look like the academic type, which I think's helped me kind of access and get into a few doors quite often. But yeah, it's changing. Coaches are certainly they're more and more progressive, more and more open-minded. They want to know and engage with more things. But
Yeah.
you always stumble into some of those coaches who are very stuck in their ways and have engaged in very similar practices for a very long time, because that's how they were coached as a player and how they've then found success as a coach. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's what suits them. And I think as long as people in my position, in like an academic kind of position, aren't kind of going in with that holier than thou attitude, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, no, I know. I hear what you're saying with that. I just find that, even when we spoke about this before about coaching licenses and federations and things, I feel like there was almost like, this is how you're going to be a coach. This is how you address your players. This is your objectives for the session. It has to be timed. It can't go over. Then you have to move from one thing. You got to go from small sided to, and then eventually you got to end with bigger numbers and going to goal with keepers. And I felt it's so constricting. And I felt, one of my biggest problems with it was, I felt that the coach was the sole source of knowledge. And everything that came out of the coach's mouth was like the holy grail. He was Jesus in a sweatsuit. And this is where the learning was going to happen. Where I really always felt that creating the environment was where the learning was going to happen. And that's why I felt like a lot of the things that you talk about are so important. Um, and one of the things that, when we go down the path of player development, you always talk about game representative. Can you talk a little bit just what that is? Because I actually have some more. I want to ask you a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so representative design as a concept comes from uh kind of like some Russian movement science in like the 60s. Founded a lot on kind of ecological psychology research. And it essentially just means that, are we appropriately representing the natural environment where we would see that behavior? So if we're talking from a research perspective, a lot of my research was done on goalkeepers, and there's been a bit of a timeline in goalkeeping research where it started off with goalkeepers standing still with a joystick and moving a joystick in a direction they would think the video screen penalty kick situation is throwing the virtual football at them. Then it moved on to kind of they're in a real life goal, but they're seeing a real life person take the penalty, but again, they're kind of shouting out the direction, or they're not fully going through the movement. Then we saw some stuff kind of which are a bit more realistic and real life penalty kicks. So that's kind of that scale of it's becoming more and more representative, and by doing that, it's becoming closer to the real habitat that we see these goalkeepers actually exist. So a lot of our work was looking at even more kind of representative situations. So penalty kicks make up the most minuscule number of goalkeepers' interactions per season. To us, that still didn't tell us a great deal. So we started to try and create these 1v1 situations, which still have enough experimental control to yield some interesting data, but also it's real enough so I can take this research to a coach and say, well, look, we're not in the lab, we're on the field, and we're doing real life situations that your goalkeepers will engage with. So our findings are really important here. So that's, I guess, where representative design came from a research perspective. But then for talking about representative learning design, which is how we then might approach our practice situations, is can we just make sure we're keeping our athletes, our learners, coupled to the most relevant information sources that are present in that environment? So, and again, this is really scaled. We can have right up the top here where it's kind of big macro games where it's very much looks and feels like the game. 11v11, normal football rules. You might even have a proper referee in the game in training. Like, that's super representative. We can slide back down this scale. We might have some small unit play kind of stuff. We might be looking at particular phases. We might be looking at kind of, for us, we're working on our exploit phase. So having the ball in the start of the opposition's defensive third and how we can break down a deep block. We might just clip part of that moment. So we might just have the defensive right back, defensive right side of centre back, their pivot midfielder. And I might have my left winger, my number 10 and my number 9. And we might just work with those 6 players in this nice, small, conditioned space. Lots of real representative information is still there. So my players are still coupling to something that's very real. And ultimately, that's where learning takes place, where those individuals are coupling to relevant information sources. That's what's going to transfer into the game on the Saturday or the Sunday when it matters most.
Now, let me ask you this, Ben. So obviously, if you add a little bit of opposition in there, now it becomes even more representative. But at a certain point, like if you're going to remember, everyone used to do shadow play, right? It's got to lose its value at a certain point, because if a player does shadow play X amount of times, how much more are they going to learn?
Yeah, I mean, as a bit of I guess it comes from my philosophy as a coach. I do very little, if any, unopposed stuff. The only unopposed stuff that we do with our programs are generally around return from injury, maybe managing some players' load. But in terms of our actual training for learning, training for performance, we always work on the basis that we're opposed.
Yeah,
because that's the most pressing and most important constraint that any individual is going to face during a game. That's where their actions are going to be governed by. It's by the opposition and their placement and their pressures and how they're kind of restricting the spaces in the field. It's all well and good my players being in the right places, but ultimately my decision to offload the ball to my number 11 is going to be governed whether I've got a big birdie number 8 midfielder who's pressing me at 100 miles an hour. So for us, we always keep in opposition, and now we can scale that up and scale it down, and we can underload and overload based on the demands and what we want to get out of it and the intensity we want to train at. And if we want lots of success, we might reduce the amount of defense. If we want to make it like really difficult, we're working on a new problem, we might increase the defense.
So Ben, let me give you an example. Say you're 10v3, one touch in a 10x10 area, whatever. That at any point in that, even though it's not a soccer game, because there's no goals, there's no keepers, it does represent, it could be like a small moment in time in a game. And it could even be 2 against 2 in the corner, one touch, even though there's 8 other players, whatever. So these things have value, but how much, but then like almost like the variety, the variability, like how much do you put on like constantly varying problems and exercises so the players, because soccer is at heart a chaotic game. We can't practice from a standstill everything that's going to happen in the game. We just can't do it. So how much value do you put on constant variability and trying to create flexible players who could solve problems all over the place, whatever you ask them to do?
Tons. I love overloading players' variability. I think is a massive part of, I guess, my coaching philosophy. And players don't always like it, players have turned around before and said, like, Ben, you've got to pack it in. It's like, it's late. I'm tired. Like, there's a limit to how much variability they're able to engage with. I remember a session I did with when I was at the women's team. It was just we just weren't connecting with it because it was just too variable. It was kind of mid December, cold, it was boggy. Like, they were part-time players, they'd all had long days, and it's like there's an element to it, but I think that variability is where you get some of the key learning. It's where you build those flexible, adaptable, functional footballers, which ultimately is the bit that's important. If we're talking about longer term development, they have to be able to recognize and respond to the key information sources they're picking up that they can then transfer into the game. And that only comes from facing lots of different situations, lots of different circumstances against lots of different kinds of problems, opposition. And you only get that in that kind of dynamic and constantly changing sort of practices.
Absolutely. So listen, it's funny. So I have a question for you about this, where it comes from, like, affordances, perceived affordances, game models, all this stuff. So a little while back, I was at one of the MLS clubs, and their game model is so strict that everything is about pressing and numbers. Every time you get the ball out wide, you're going to cross it into the top of the box, try to counter press and win the second ball. So everything was about forward passing, counter pressing, knocking into the 18. And what I would say is, as a youth player going into that club at 12 years old, would that stunt your development, because your affordances now are, what are your options? They're already predetermined by the game model, and you're only 12 years old. Like, what do you think about those types of things? Because now we're talking about developing flexible players and finding solutions, but is there a danger to putting kids into a strict game model and a strict thing too early?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that they probably get very good at executing that game model. So from the outside looking in, it probably looks like you've got lots of really good footballers because they can execute that particular game model. But I guess the worry is when they don't make the cut at that club or they go elsewhere, like, are they going to be able to adapt to a different game model or a different kind of football or different problems? So I think that's you start to place limits on their capacity to grow. So no, as a player myself, I was very lazy in training, really, really, really lazy. But I was much better in games. And when I started playing kind of scholars football, so kind of about 16 to 18, education based football, I was forced to train a lot more because I was on, like, you're part of a program, you were 4 days a week, you had to train, and I found my performances kind of really suffering because I was in very strict training regimes, kind of very strict models of how the save should look and how you should, sidestep across the goal and make a positive step when you're making a save, and all those little details that really over conditioned me. And I lost some of that fluency and kind of some of that chaoticness I had as a goalkeeper, which is probably the reason I was actually kind of reasonably good as a youth goalkeeper, was because I was just kind of, my technique as far as a model would go was garbage. It was terrible.
How
But
much how much flexibility you as a coach, Ben, like, putting into a game model when you're teaching your team, going through the thing? How much are you building in a good amount of flexibility?
yeah, I try to. I mean, it was different. Where I've worked for different head coaches, and a lot of head coaches have had their own ideas of a game model. So when I was at Gillingham Women, the game model was quite strict. No, there was but then the demands of us at a club at the time is we were low in the league, not necessarily fighting relegation, but kind of scrapping to not be drawn into that relegation battle. So we had quite a strict game model, and we got some good results from it, and it kind of that seemed to be okay. Whereas now at the new club, I've got much more autonomy on the team's identity, and our in possession game model, like, we just have one word, and that's just execute. Because, like, that's all. If we're executing, for me, that's enough. I trust that I've got 3 or 4 very creative players. There's no point having a game model for them because they're like creative street footballers. Like, just play, just execute, just finish, be
Yeah.
creative. I mean, off the ball, we're a bit more structured.
And like
Again,
basic things. So if you got 3 center mids and they're all creative, whatever, are you basically telling them, hey, do your thing, but make sure all 3 of you don't go forward at the same time? We got to have some balance.
yes, we have some anchors in place. So like if we have one fullback which is being expansive, the other one, inverts themselves. So we have some kind of non-negotiables in that sense. But when they're actually on the ball, like they're free to play.
Yeah.
And there's times where we change that. So if we're playing an away game, I mean, we play on an artificial pitch, so it runs nicely. But when we play an away game down on like the southeast coast in January and it's raining, the rain's horizontal and like the wind is swirling, like we might put some like limitations on that freedom. We might say, well, if you get it in your own half, just hit a channel and we'll earn the right to play in their part of the pitch. So there's some circumstance stuff, but I guess that's where we're senior and performance rather than youth and development. So there's some of those trade-offs. But ultimately, I've got to keep some flexibility in that game model. I've tried in my past to have these really intricate, mapped out kind of passing sequences and patterns of play and building phases. They don't work.
Yeah.
I don't believe they will, unless maybe you're full time and you've got the time to like drill it into these people. And even then I'm questioning it.
Yeah. I mean, are you having conversations? Like for me, I'll be like, a lot of times we get some game video, but not a lot. We don't. And I'm telling the winger, look, try to beat him twice. If he's really fast and athletic and you can't beat him, got to adjust the game. It's up to you. I'm not going to tell the kid what to do, but you know what I'm saying? Like those are part of being an intelligent footballer. They got to start to figure that out for themselves as well. Correct?
Yeah, massively. And I guess a lot of it is, just helping them understand to play to their strength. There's no point in us imparting a game model on a team that doesn't, like, and we're asking players to make decisions that don't help them and support them in their strong skill sets.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, that's the difference between, well, I'm talking in the example of England and the UK here, but the difference between a good academy footballer in a professional full-time academy and a good kind of recreational style player is that an academy player just knows what their strengths are. They just play to their strengths. So when we start to impart models on them that maybe don't fit in their own their capacity to play or doesn't fit with their capabilities, that's when I think we get problems.
So Ben, we're talking about like individual players and teams right now. If you're the director of a club, right? Are you going to, how important is having a methodology to say this is how we teach, soccer 5 through 7, 7 through 9, blah blah blah? How important is it to have a methodology, and is that methodology going to be flexible just like the game model? But because I feel that people, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, a curriculum obviously is a list of topics that you're going to cover, much different than a way of teaching. Can you kind of give a little bit, like if you're a director of a coach, because we have a lot of coaching directors that'll be watching this and they're in their clubs, like, and for me, like one of the biggest problems I see, let me not call it a problem, and obstacles in the US is you have a lot of clubs where every coach just does whatever they want their way, and there's just there almost is no identity and no way of teaching in a club. Can you speak to me a little bit about methodology and the importance of it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I've worked as a coach in a club that has had a very strict methodology that I've not agreed with. And that's been tough. So I guess it's finding that balance between trusting the staff that you've employed to kind of to deliver what your vision and giving them the flexibility to act as a coach, but then also making sure everyone's aligned. So
if it's your club, Ben, what are you doing for a methodology?
If it's my club, I think there's got to be an underpinning philosophy, right? So clubs like Ajax, for example, they have a very clear identity of who Ajax are.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is perhaps more important than a particular, way we coach. Maybe perhaps the methodology is more embedded in the cultural norms and values that exist in that club, rather than a particular way to coach or a particular way to play. And I think those values will then manifest themselves in the kind of people you have in the club. And this is a bit of a wishy-washy answer.
Yeah, I mean, like Barcelona at one point in time definitely had their methodology, their way
Yeah.
of playing. They have now started to stray a little bit from that, in my opinion. They're starting to just big money, big money, big money, and they've kind of strayed away from what they were. But you know, and you listen, this kind of leads me to, and we also saw Man United this weekend, right? Yeah. So in a sense, when I look at clubs like Man United worth $1 billion or something, right? Do you just say to a coach, hey, do your thing at Man United? You're playing with $1 billion. Or is it better to have a place like Ajax where you have a methodology and you have a way? And honestly, the coach is just another spoke in the wheel. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess you get into a discussion around different kinds who kind of managers and head coaches. I mean, Solskjaer's not really either at the moment. He's kind of
But are they building anything at
out.
Manchester United? The Ajax, they're always
Yeah.
they're building young players.
You know, it's tough. You'd like to hope they are, but they just seem there's so much disconnect. I mean, signing Ronaldo on a of like a commercial front was genius, but on like an actual on the pitch, he's costing them. I mean, I know he'll pop up and score all your goals, but they as an off the ball team, they are like appalling because they're trying to defend with 10 players.
But it's almost a mismatch because now you're just leaving it up to random coaches. The next guy that comes in
Yeah.
does what he wants. The next guy. Like, is there, for me, when I look at a methodology, like I favor a hybrid model where the kids kind of get a well rounded education in positional play. They get to play street soccer. They get to do all these things. So, let me just throw a couple terms out at you. How important is donor sports, Ben?
Nice. This is a good discussion. Yeah, massively important. So there's some work coming out of Sheffield Hallam, but a guy called Ben, can't remember his surname. Ben Stafford, I think. Coming out of Sheffield Hallam University, he's one of Keith David's PhD students, and he's doing some really awesome work on parkour as a donor sport.
Oh, I put that in my course. That's amazing.
Ah, perfect. Yeah, so
The video clips are ridiculous.
it's mad, right? But like these organized like play spaces, like using parkour as a donor sport, and makes a lot of sense. Kind of getting that movement variability.
Huge sense, right?
Yeah.
Just so we had Ronaldinho credit his unique touches on the ball to sand soccer, playing on the beach, saying that people don't understand the touches he takes at Barcelona because he learned it on the beach. Neymar with the futsal and Met Ozil with cage soccer where the ball couldn't go out of bounds. Those things, what I love about those, Ben, is they're transferable, right, to the 11v11 game.
Yeah, so the topic of transfer is really interesting there. So you get specific transfer and more kind of general transfer, and kind of these donor sports give really good general transfer. They give opportunities to explore movements in different and really unique ways. So Zlatan Ibrahimovic, for example, when he's kind of background in taekwondo, that's it. And like his ability to therefore, like he's got that general transfer, so he can pull a ball out of kind of midair because he has that kind of that flexibility and that movement capacity to do that. So if you think of it in terms of general transfer, and we're kind of enriching that individual's movement repertoire, their skill repertoire, it's a really effective way to get some youth development stuff. They might not get lots of skill specific transfer immediately, and you might not see those learning gains immediately, but over longer timescales, you'll see where kind of by enriching their curriculum at a younger age, you're just adding tools to their toolbox that they can then use, which is where we might see them transfer into soccer, for example.
Listen, there's some really cool stuff. The school that I work at, he used to be a professional quarterback, and I asked him, I was like, arena football, which is a small game of football. It's like 7v7 football on a tiny field, and they're saying the quarterback learns to release the ball quicker, and they learn to view the field differently. And basically, arena football makes for a better quarterback in the NFL in the big game. And I found that very interesting. Like box lacrosse is like a little, they use small goals and it's in this like hockey rink. And they say when you see a box lacrosse player from Canada on a big lacrosse field, you could tell by his stick handling skills he was a box lacrosse guy. So I think it's so important to look into these donor sports stuff. How important, so we have the structured coaching aspect, right? And then we have how important is the unstructured play, the street soccer stuff to a developmental context?
Yeah, it's I guess finding balance, isn't it? And there's probably no single right answer. It's just about are we exposing them to enough opportunities of doing other stuff, and giving them some freedom to explore. Like ultimately, like young kids love soccer, so they're going to want to play soccer lots of times. But are we giving them the opportunity to maybe explore something different, play different variations of soccer? So things like futsal, things like beach soccer, things like so. I guess is are we giving them the choice and the option to explore those donor sports?
And if you're going to be freaking good, though, if you're going to be really good, are you subscribing to like a gymnast who trains 68 hours a day, a violinist who trains Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule? I know that the academics have issues with his 10,000 hour rule, but the reality is, are you going to be a pro if you play 3 times a week?
I don't think we know. I think there's too many factors at play outside of that that we can't control, and I think that's one of the problems is with the things like the 10,000 hour rule is we associate kind of these kind of high performance wins and we forget about all the other people that didn't make it despite playing full time and doing 60 hours a week of practice.
Yeah.
In the same way that there's lots of kids that did lots of donor sports that made it, but then lots also that didn't make it. So the answer is the cop answer is we just don't know.
Do you
But
think that the top players, though, if you ask almost every top player, how much did you play as a kid? The answer is pretty much every day.
yeah, I think, but then what that looked like, I think, is often very different. So what did that play look like? Was it strictly scheduled coached sessions all the time? Probably not. There was probably some variability and some enjoyment and explorative stuff and some playground stuff, some stuff with friends that probably was equally as important there. And I think that's where we get some of the balance. I
So,
don't think
sorry, Ben, go ahead.
that's the thing. I think enrichment stuff is like it's just like any normal education. So donor sports, just to enrich what's available to you, can only ever be a good thing. And I think in terms of the stuff around kind of lots of increased burnout and overuse injuries, it just reduces the chance of those happening from just having a strict kind of deliberate soccer specific training program as a young kid.
Yeah, and how much, listen, players are like robots, right? And because I'm a coach and, I would take them on road trips, I got to buy all their meals. I got to tell them where to be, who to line up, who's rooming with who. And their job is easy. They just go and listen to directions, right? And I almost feel like they get to the soccer practice, they line up, they get on the line, you tell them what to do for a warm up, blah, blah, blah. For me, I was speaking with a guy, I forgot his name now, but he used to coach at Arsenal and he's in Holland for a long time. He was saying when he was a kid, there was 3 fields in the street. And the first field was for the top guys, and then obviously it goes down and down. And if you did really well, the next group was going to pick you. And it was just kind of like your rite of passage, and it was never organized by adults, and it was just the kids. And like I almost feel like we're missing that today with the kids being able to self-organize themselves and get those skills and those social skills too to go organize their own stuff. Like I almost feel like some kids are lost nowadays if you're not telling them what to do.
Yeah, particularly in the UK. I mean, there's been so many kind of spaces that have just been bulldozed and houses built on them. So those spaces aren't available anymore just to go and play. I
Yeah,
mean, where I used to play as a kid, like those spaces don't exist anymore. They're now kind of nice, leafy suburb housing areas that have no ball game signs all over the place.
yeah. And then at that point, I mean, we're also saying how much is the cell phones and the iPads more attractive than going out and playing ball? And that's, I would assume at some point that's going to take a little bit of a toll. Um, Listen, what do you think about we use your some of the spots in England as an example, like maybe the club you were at is when we talk about variability. how do you think it would affect a club if you bring in like 3 kids from Brazil and plop them in the academy there? Like, it wouldn't that be good for people? Because what I'm trying to get to a little bit is we wanted to talk to you briefly about constraints. And these are kids who maybe they grew up in, playing in all different environments where the actual physical environment was the constraint, or the ball or this or that. And they develop these unique skill sets that nobody else would have based upon their environments. And I almost feel like if you could bring some kids like that in different clubs, it could help everybody. What's your thought on you know unique skill sets and environments producing that and all those things?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to that variability question again on a smaller scale. If dropped three kids from Brazil who were like very good technical kind of samba style footballers, it's a different problem that your players have got to solve, and it's a different problem for them to solve, and it's just everyone's now learning because they're faced with new information. We get very good at playing against our own players in training. So if all you ever do in training is playing the right way, small, quick, zippy passes, positional style play, you get very good at attacking and defending against those kind of players, and you get very used to the sort of players you're playing against in training. So remember a time when I was at a club for a while, and we were we were a very good cup team, because we were quite good at being flexible and knowing that when we play this team who are much higher ranked than us, they play brilliant football, but we know that they only ever train against themselves, and their manager is very strict around playing these very small space kind of possession games. So we played good football at the time. We just turned out where we're going to smash it. We're just going to absolutely smash the ball long. We'll play the biggest player we've got up top. We're just going to hammer it at his head. Play directing behind them, and they just didn't know how to deal with it because they'd spent so long in training only ever attacking and defending against ball passing, quick transition teams.
I've been on the other end of that. I've been getting beat before like that. It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating, very hard to deal with. 35-mile-an-hour winds. The field's a little narrow. It's just a mess. You're right. You got to figure out ways to adapt. It's not so easy for sure.
It's just where kind of our behavior then starts to emerge around those constraints. So I think in the course, we spoke about how those kind of the task, environment, and organism constraints all kind of coexist and interrelate and nest themselves together. And that's where kind of those emergent behaviors are going to come from. And we can't predict behavior. It's not the most deterministic thing in the world, particularly in football where it's so kind of chaotic and messy.
Mm-hmm.
The more adaptable our players are around constraints that might impose themselves on the performance or in training, the better or more functional those players are going to be in multiple different situations.
So by taking, I always felt that if you allow absolute freedom all the time, that kids will start to solve problems using the same solution all the time. If they're going to solve it with the left-footed play, that's all they do is trying to solve the problem with the left foot. So I really I really think it's important because it not just changes over time, possibly a skill set, it also changes decision making because it changes their perception of what they're looking at. Because even though they're looking at the same thing, they're looking at it differently if you take certain things away. So when in your sessions, do you use a lot of constraint-based methods?
Yeah. So my argument is that everything in the world is a constraints-based approach. The chair I'm sat on right now is constraining my behavior in a certain way. So we approach it in that perspective. And we try to think with that hat on, that constraints are always going to be imposing themselves on our sessions. It's just which ones do we want to really invite and make them a bit more obvious, and which ones do we want to try and dampen down a little bit. So we know before we've deliberately trained on the back pitch that's kind of only partially lit by our floodlights, because we know that on Saturday we're going to play at a ground that's basically like a farm, and our back pitch is like a farm. So we'll train on our back pitch for a week, because those are that's what's going to constrain our behavior on the Saturday. So let's make sure that's going to constrain our performance in training in the week leading up to that game. Things like training under different levels of fatigue. I mean, normally you kind of save your high intensity stuff for the end of the session because you build yourself up slowly. But a few times we've started really, really, really intense, like big pitch transition games. And then we've gone into some more kind of phase of play match stuff because the players kind of those individual constraints on them around kind of their fatigue and they're starting to tired, not going to concentrate as much. Their minds are going to start sweeping elsewhere. It's getting late, it's cold, and then we're going to do our phase of play stuff because if we can do it then when they're tired and then hopefully that might have more impact to transfer into the game. And then also in terms of the actual constraints and approach stuff, in terms of the framework and how we manage in constraints to get out what we want from our sessions. So if our intentions for that session are working around counterattacks, we need to constrain our small-sided game so that it invites lots of situations where we see the ball get turned over. So rather than having like your normal box pitch, we'll have like a bit like an hourglass. So we start nice and wide and it will narrow itself into the middle here. So whenever the ball is going into the middle of the pitch, the space massively decreases. So the chance of the ball turning over increases. Yeah. And then we're going to get lots more opportunities for them to counterattack. So we use these constraints to kind of solicit or invite certain actions that we want to see. So like that counterattacking one there.
That's really cool. Thomas Tuchel did it the opposite to get his wingers to make those runs inside. That's quite interesting. Yeah. So the constraints, yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal for me as well. I'm always using constraint-based training. Kind of wrapping up here, Ben. I mean, it's been really good. I'm trying to cover as much as I can here with you. I have all my notes here, Ben. I've been going from one thing to the other here. So at this point, Ben, I forgot what I was going to ask you. I had one more thing I was going to ask you. I forgot what the hell I was going to ask you, but that's all right. Listen, let's go a little bit into if people want to get in contact with you, if they want to take courses from you, like let's hear how they can contact you and the courses that you're offering and when they start.
So the final run of the Rethinking Soccer course that obviously you're on yourself is starting on the 21st of November. So it goes out for sale on the 1st of November, which is the day before this be released, right? Am I right in the zone? Yeah. So that's up for sale on the 1st of November. That course, it starts on the 21st of November. The pre-sale starts on the 1st of November, so you get $50 off. And that runs for 10. So there's 5 sessions over a course of 10 weeks. There's lots of stuff in between that as well. So we have like a Slack page where we throw loads of content on as well, kind of keep the discussions going away from the live sessions. But 5 meant to be an hour-long live sessions. They always go on for an hour and a half because you just get too involved. And just trying to talk about soccer from this ecological approach. There's a little bit of delivery from me, but mostly it's kind of just chatting about soccer and everyone else's kind of perspectives and how we can attach some of the theoretical stuff to our view of soccer training. And we look at some different case studies, go through a bit of theory as well, but we try to keep it nice and light and make sure it's nicely applied all the time.
I really like the discussion part. I mean, when I was in the course, obviously I wouldn't shut up. I had you on there for an hour and a half each time. It was really good. I remember the last thing I was going to touch base on with you was this, is that when you go into a coaching session, if you feel something is either going really well and you want to extend it, or just kind of you're like, you know what, maybe I want to go into something else on the spur of the moment. Do you do those things? Do you feel comfortable like you're a freaking artist and you could just go and off in any direction, whatever you think in the moment? And then B is I just want to conclude with, like, because soccer is this, we always think of it as 4 moments in the game and in tactical periodization, they just, whatever, the attacking organization, transition, defensive organization, defensive transition. And I always kind of looked at it as in its truest form, it's all 4 together. And if you if you can have the team playing the actual game, then each kid can get what they need out of it in a sense. I'm not saying that you can't run any type of practice you want, but by dissecting this into all these different pieces and just running these specific prescriptive training sessions based upon what the coach thinks the team might need, really only one kid might need that thing. Where and I almost so can you just give me your take on how you look at those two things? I know I split up two topics there, but can you just give me your view?
Yeah, so that first one, I'm I think my strengths are kind of on the run, changing and kind of rediverting sessions. Doesn't mean it always goes right; it goes wrong a lot. But I think having the confidence to kind of to make those changes and then have those discussions with players when it goes wrong and be like, well, I was trying to get this out of it, hasn't really landed. We're going to now change it and we're going to do this instead, and we'll see how that works. So loads of times sessions go wrong, but I think it's the fact I think players always work. They know I'm trying to keep it engaging and I'm trying to keep the intensity high, and I think they've got a bit of trust in me as a coach to do that. So when it does go wrong, it's okay. It just means tweaking it quickly and getting it back on track.
But you're giving yourself the flexibility to go with things the way you feel.
Yeah. So my session plans normally I have quite quite a picture in my mind that I'd really want to hit. And so I want to hit this practice. I want to hit this practice. I want to do some set piece stuff here. I like trying to stick to that, but I know that that's not the reality of it, and I'm quite good at throwing in some changes on the run. So that's some different constraints, like it might not be landing properly. So we did a lot of transition work a couple of weeks ago because we were just getting when we turned the ball over, we were just getting absolutely rinsed. So we did a load of work with kind of player to player marking, zoned out the pitch, and you can only challenge or you only press your player that you're paired with. And I've used it before and it's worked. It wasn't working this one night, and it was one of them. It's like, oh, okay, we've tried it, it isn't working. We've got to change it. So that's when we went for the kind of the funnel shaped pitch to try and get those transitions a different way. Content is the same. I guess it was just literally just changing the shape of the pitch, and we got what we needed in that moment. Then forgot where I was going.
Listen, you know what I always thought would be an interesting book, which I am in the process sort of putting together, but these books never quite come off like in the time periods about here's 75 constraints you could use as a football coach and here's how you could use them. Because we always talk about constraints as coaches, but like I've never heard of that hourglass pitch before. So that's going in the book, Ben. Don't worry, I'm going to put your name next to it. But like those are really cool things, but we think, where is the manual for that?
Yeah, I guess it's tough. It's tough to write the manual because some they don't always work, and you sometimes get the opposite outcome. So I think that's the difficulty of, and we have this problem with our undergraduate students a lot on the coaching modules is just getting them to try stuff.
Yeah.
And like it might not work, but the fact you've noticed it and you want to make the impact, that's the important bit. We can play around with kind of how we're balancing out the constraints as we go through. I guess the important bit is just trying to be creative and innovative with what we're designing and not falling back onto generic possession practices. Are we trying to be creative and actually meet the intentions that our players need? Are we getting the learning outcomes we wanted to get out of it?
And then my last question there, Ben, was how do you view like the whole compared to the separate pieces? Do you put a little more value on the whole compared to the separate?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think, the whole kind of attacking phase, defensive phase, positive transition, negative transition. I can understand why it's very popular because it is very easy to box off and say, well, we're in this phase now. But I don't think you're ever in any phase. You're just constantly in flux. Like there's no even when you're attacking, you might have we might be wary of turning over the ball. So we're always kind of slightly overlapping into different phases of the game. So for us, I think the game is always transitioning anyway. The ball turns over so often. I'm we're always just building or breaking. That's kind of how we view. I'll say we. That's how I always view it. Is in defense, we're building, so we're kind of building our blocks to defend, waiting to then break, i.e., spike and win the ball back. And when we're on the ball, we're building, waiting for our chance to break, and by breaking, I mean attack. So for me, it's just building and breaking, and we just work off those two lines.
Yeah.
Whether that's
Yeah,
in possession or out of possession.
makes a lot of sense to me. I just
Sorry.
it's funny, even when I go to even when I go to a young person's practice at 7 years old, I want it to look like soccer, because if it doesn't look like soccer, how are they even going to transform anything and like make it relate to the game so they can get something out of it? So
Mm.
for me personally, I always like to see, are real decisions being made, and that game realistic decisions. And I know, as we get on and on, it goes into workload and what day of the week and all these types of things, but I think it's so important to have decisions in a game representative setting going on. Ben, listen, it was really great. I wanted to thank you again for coming on, and we will try to get. I recommend 1,000% you take Ben's course. I think it's awesome, and make sure you send him a note and say, "Hey, Ben, I took the course. I saw you on Coach G's maybe you'll give him a hat or something, Ben. I don't know."
Yeah.